Today, we're diving deep into the critical field of climate solutions and carbon removal with Ben Swainbank, systems expert and leader at Oceanid Climate and Carbon Solutions. Ben, welcome to the show. Please give us a brief introduction.
Thank you. I'm really pleased to have this opportunity and really pleased to be here. And so, as you mentioned, I am the founder of Oceanid Climate and Carbon Solutions, and we work in the carbon dioxide removal space, specifically looking at marine solutions.
We're excited to have you. Ocean ID is focused on some of the most pressing challenges of our time. To start, could you give us an overview of Ocean ID's mission and the key areas you're working on?
Sure. So we work in the CDR space and looking at atmospheric carbon dioxide removal, and specifically looking at, really, I got into this, how can we do this at a very large scale? What could really work at the multi-gigaton scale that the world needs and requires? And so the most promising pathways that I saw as we begin to explore the space are really in the marine and kind of ocean spaces. That's where we really have the opportunities. That's where there's this enormous potential, but also a great number of unknowns. It's very much nascent industry, still kind of figuring it out. And so as I got into this, I could kind of see that potential that's there, but then also all the challenges that are required to really both even really to get started, but then to really scale up to the scales that are going to be relevant for this climate crisis. And so the Oceanid's mission, and we've been through several different iterations and business models that I'd be happy to get into, but it's to really to build some of that infrastructure, cultivate the framework, help the project developers, help the methodology developers, really focusing on the verification pathways and systems, just so that to answer those fundamental questions, how do we do this? How do we know it works? How do we know we're doing it responsibly? And then by answering those questions, how do we move this forward?
Well, ocean is huge, two-thirds of the surface, and it's so deep. So it's humongous.
Right.
So
That
there's
that
a lot of
is
opportunities there.
Yes, and the scale of our problem is also large, and fortunately, so if you're really looking for solutions that like that's multi-gigaton scale, that's a promising place to look.
Ocean ID specializes in marine CDR pathways. What makes mCDR a crucial part of the climate solutions landscape?
So mCDR stands for Marine CDR, so using the ocean's resources, using the canvases. Uh, and the reason why focusing on marine pathways is so promising is that really, as I mentioned before, like if we think about, the world gets hotter and hotter and warmer each and every year indefinitely till we reach the point where we're pulling more carbon dioxide out of the air than we're emitting. Right? But that's the challenge that we're facing. And so we all recognize that we need to decarbonize, reduce emissions on a massive scale. But if you think about, all right, in what year, even if we're really aggressive, if we're really successful, we're really committed to this decarbonization effort on a global scale, we're really doing what's necessary, even under that optimistic scenario, which of course we're far off of right now. In what year do I think the world will be 75% of the way there, right? If we think about it that way. And I think we're a ways away, right? Maybe like 2070, maybe by the end of the century, right? That. And so even under the that effort, we still need to be removing billions of tons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere just to get to a plateau point, just for things to stop getting worse. And so if you think about, all right, what could possibly work at that scale? Billions of tons each and every year. Really, the solutions that seem to hold the most potential are in the marine space, right? And so nothing against planting lots of trees and afforestation initiatives, nothing really against direct air capture, but can these things really work at a multi-gigaton scale beyond where we are today? There's reasons for concern, and not that we need those solutions. I'm definitely an advocate for them, but also I really am a strong advocate for that our best bets are in the ocean, right? And there's really two. There's abiotic pathways, which is primarily alkalinity. You can introduce alkaline materials, including abundant minerals like say olivine, into marine space and deacidify the ocean, which is currently getting substantially worse, and while naturally drawing down mineralizing carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So the abiotic pathways is one way, and then the other one is marine biology. We have this huge canvas, as you mentioned. The majority of the surface of the Earth is covered with this massive amounts of water, and so if we can take these natural biological pumps, cultivate lots and lots of biomass, put that biomass somewhere where it's not going to recirculate, where that carbon is going to be locked into that mass and not get back in the atmosphere. And the bottom of the ocean is right there available to us. If you can, get it there and demonstrate that's going to stay there, then that's really an opportunity to do it at a massive scale. And of course, there are many concerns doing this, certainly within the oceanographic community, but within the human community, we definitely want to be making sure that we're doing this safely, that we're doing this responsibly, that we're not creating ecological disasters. And so that is a large part of our focus. Is we focus on both the carbon accounting side, but then also the ecosystem and ecological assessment side, and just to figure out how can this be done responsibly. But anyways, the reason we're focusing on marine CDR is because it's a moment potential. That's probably, from my perspective, our best bet for having a sustainable future.
What are the unique challenges and opportunities associated with mCDR
Yeah.
compared to land-based carbon removal?
The biggest opportunity is scale. There is a lot of resources, and there are certainly contention for marine resources, but there's less contention than you'll find on the land. And of course, things like direct air capture requires a lot of clean energy. If we had lots and lots of clean energy, there's lots of things we need to be doing with that right now, in addition to sucking carbon into the atmosphere. Biomass cultivation on the land requires lots of fresh water, among other resources, as well as lots of terrestrial land resources. Both freshwater resources and land usage are going to be highly contentious, and especially in a warmer, hotter, drier, more unpredictable climate world, which we're rapidly heading toward, right? And so those are kind of why the terrestrial solutions have some limitations, right? And so the marine, we have more resources available to us. We have this vast ocean, but also we have many, many challenges related to working in the ocean. One, it's just very expensive. It's hard. The ocean wants to break up your experiment. It is very difficult to monitor. It's very expensive to operate. It's very hard to orchestrate capital and other things to those. And then it's also very hard to evaluate, to measure that carbon fluxes or any kind of fluxes on the ocean. It's just a messy system. It's a chaotic system. And so if you're trying to do really kind of precise evaluations of both carbon accounting and ecosystem impacts in that environment, there are challenges for sure. And then you have to be very careful about the ecological and ecosystem impacts of what you're doing, that you're not we're looking to do very large scale interventions because we have to, right? We wouldn't really even be talking about any of this. There's no reason to introduce millions of tons of alkalinity in marine coastal areas if you didn't have to, but we do. But we have to be sure that we're doing so responsibly, that we're not creating problems more than we're solving. And so that is absolutely one of the big challenges of trying to advance these solutions.
What do you think of kelp farming?
I think it's great. I think so. So we've worked with several different kelp partners, right? And there are a couple different things you can do with it, and not all of them. So one, it'll be increasingly important as just a food stock or other useful products. But if you're doing it for those reasons, you're not necessarily sequestering carbon, right? If livestock are eating it or humans are eating it, or it's going to some other process where it'll naturally just re-emit it into the atmosphere. So there are lots of potentially beneficial ecological impacts. There's plenty of beneficial commercial and social impacts that are worthwhile, that don't necessarily also sequester carbon, right? So, but that doesn't mean they're not worth doing, right? But then in terms of sequestering carbon, you can grow macroalgae at a massive scale. And then really the two main things that people are doing with it is use it as a feedstock for biochar. And that's, you bring it on land, convert it into biochar, and now you have this really rich soil supplement, which is both locking away carbon while cultivating livestock, cultivating agriculture. So that's great. Like, we're big fans. We've worked with several projects around using biomass for converting into biochar. That's a little more involved so there's probably scalability limitations to that approach. And then if you're really trying to think about a world where this is happening at hundreds of megatons, at a gigaton scale, that becomes more complicated, right? But then you're probably looking at simply sinking it to abyssal depth and trying to do so responsibly, and making sure that you're not. But that would be how you're using it. You're just growing it for the purposes of
Sinking it deep into the ocean.
the ocean. You're just trying to lock that carbon somewhere where it's not going to escape, come back, bubble back up for centuries or millennia.
I would have thought that if you did this deep in the ocean, the costs would be lower than land-based.
If you sink it there, I think it is. Like, certainly at scale, that the reason for within the carbon removal industry, it's all about efficiency, right? What's it going to cost us in terms of logistics, in terms of capital, to get a ton of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and then how big can you scale it, and at what price, and what what's required. And so I think at scale, there's certainly reasons to believe that this is kind of why we are advocates for these approaches, that you can efficiently scale it. You can do it at a massive level, but these are very, like gigaton carbon removal is the size of the state of Maine, right, on an annual basis. So these are very, very large scales, just to give you a sense of how big to play at this scale. So potentially, again, at a massive scale, the size of small countries, that you would need to be thinking at. But still, to operate at that scale through will certainly require enormous resources, but relative to other pathways trying to operate at the same scale, there's reason to believe that it would be much more efficient.
You offer a range of services, including MRV methodology development.
Mhm.
Could you explain the importance of robust monitoring, reporting, and verification?
It's really the foundation of this whole industry and certainly of what we do, right? And so if you're in the carbon removal, really what you are selling, your product, even if you're selling onto the voluntary carbon market, or there are cases, right? So that's people are making net zero commitments, could be nations, could be institutions. And so on the voluntary carbon market, people are looking to buy or otherwise trade in quality offsets or are required to guarantee the production of a quality carbon removal offset, right? That this time. And so if you're in the carbon removal industry, your product, the thing that you're trying to sell, is really the proof that this happened, right? That this and was done accurately and truthfully, that you are being honest and rigorous in your reporting and how you're quantifying it. If you're saying we did a ton of carbon dioxide removal, show that you really did that. And if you're going to say we pulled it out of the atmosphere and we are guaranteeing, we're selling a credit that says, it we are demonstrating, we are claiming that it will not be re-released for 1,000 years, then the verification is your product, essentially, right? The proof that this really happened is the thing that you are selling. And in order to, so not only do you have to prove that it's real, which is of course essential, and build trust and make people understand that one, we need to build the demand side for this to happen, right? In order for anything to happen at any scale, there needs to be somebody willing to pay for it. And they're only going to be willing to really pay for quality products, quality removals, durable removals, if they're confident that two main things, that the carbon accounting is rigorous and real, and that the claims being made are honest and true and backed by science, and that also that you are not causing adverse ecosystem or other societal impacts, right? That you've consulted with the stakeholders, that especially at this stage, companies are very much eager. It's a voluntary carbon market. And so people who are purchasing offsets are doing so voluntarily in because of their own reputation, right? They want to present themselves and they want to be responsible global actors. And so the last thing they want to do is purchase a product that will make them look bad or irresponsible. And so really incumbent upon the verifiers and the registry partners and the project developers to all show that we are acting in good faith and that we're doing this rigorously, we're doing it well, we're doing this responsibly, and the stakes are really high. The fate of the world is if we get this wrong, and we can risk not only our own credibility as an institution, as a person, but also like this industry, it needs to exist, and for it to exist, we need to be operating responsibly, incredibly, and in good faith.
How does Oceanid ensure the accuracy and reliability of its MRV systems?
So what we do is working with methodology development partners, right? And so there are two models of kind of what it means to develop a methodology or a verification system. Right? To some extent, if there's not a published consensus methodology that exists, and project developers are required to invent one, and then to convince a one-on-one basis any offtake purchaser that theirs is appropriate and rigorous. And that is not a model that we prefer, right? We would rather see consensus standards, we'd rather see public registries, we want to see publicly available standards, and that's the kind of thing that we want to help cultivate. We want to essentially see this carbon removal credits be somewhat commodified, and so that given both simplifies both the project developer's job, because they don't have to prove to each and every one that they're being appropriate and rigorous, and that they've written their own rule books for auditing themselves, right? That's just a bad system. And so you much rather have a world where third parties are writing the protocols and then subjecting those protocols to peer reviews and consensus reviews and through an open and transparent process. And then they're subject to revision as you collect feedback. And then they become public protocols, and that multiple different project developers can then operate against, right? We are kind of a consulting organization, so we'll have to help anybody advance whatever pathway they're on and whether avenues are available to them. But certainly our preferred method is to work with public registries or other kind of reputation methodology developers who have a strong reputation, and provide our expertise to make sure that the guidance that we're providing, that the methodologies that we're developing are both rigorous, they're scientifically well informed, they've been subject to external scrutiny. And you're always walking this kind of tight line, right? Because we are all new to this. No one's really done this before, right? And so we're developing novel standards for novel pathways with there's not a lot of data set, right? So there's certainly science and there's papers and there's investigations and there's some things that we understand better than others. And so we're always trying to incorporate the latest of the extent of our current scientific understanding and work with the project developers that are working closely within the space, but also striking this balance between kind of scientific rigor and then commercial reality, especially working within the ocean. It is not hard to place an unmeetable burden. If you're not careful, you could be saying, all right, you must do this, and you're asking them to do something that is essentially impossible, that either just got no way practical or viable. And so there are certainly certain fundamental questions. Are you causing an ecosystem impact? Are you causing a monoculture that's going to have ecosystem impacts? Are you being rigorous on your accounting? Is that kelp that you're putting in this place going to bubble up in 3 centuries from now? So we have to strike this balance between we're at the limits of our understanding, coming up with good faith protocols, being honest about the limitations of our knowledge and what the models can show us and what they can't show us, and as we build these things out.
So you can't just send a robotic deep sea submersible in the middle of the Pacific Ocean to
Yeah, no,
show them that this carbon is sinking.
well, part of it, right? That could be a piece of the puzzle, right? So that yes, to show that one bailing method, say, works and is accurate and it's on the way down, it's not off and things like that. It is reaching the point you're putting at. You might have a submersible watching it to see that it's not going too fast or too slow on its way down, right? The requirements could call for the retrieval of biomass a year later, things like that, to evaluate its decomposition rates or it's still where you thought it was. And so, yeah, there are lots of pieces to the puzzle that certainly can include rovers and things like that, but that's not unlikely to kind of give you the full picture of everything we need to evaluate.
Permitting and regulatory guidance for mCDR projects. What are the key regulatory hurdles you're encountered?
The marine CDR industry is very nascent right now, right? And so there are things like the London Dumping Protocol. There's the EPA standards around you can do, and wherever you're operating, there will be a regulatory framework that's relatively strict. And the thing that the whole kind of the marine CDR industry is navigating is which for the most part is mostly phase, but certainly we're looking to move towards a commercial phase and making sure that we're doing so kind of responsibly, as I've been saying, right? And so a lot of these things are like currently most permitting does allow it to happen, certainly for research purposes. And then you can there's some ambiguity about, whether or not and even who to ask for marine CDR experts. And so, but the really thing is kind of closely with your regulatory bodies, making sure that you have authorization in the area that you're authorized, that you're looking to work. And things for better or for worse, these projects tend to have relatively long lead times. And so you just have to come with the local regulatory body and ensure that you are compliant, right? But that is absolutely a challenge.
How do you work with policymakers to create a more supportive regulatory environment for mCDR?
In the United States as well, working with policymakers is increasingly a challenge. I do really think that throughout most of CDR, and certainly marine CDR, that it will kind of we're definitely in this kind of R&D phase now, right? And that's why it's the rule books are literally kind of been written, and groups like ours are kind of at the forefront of that effort, right? We're kind of now putting out kind of the first draft of some of these standards and with more to come, right? And so I really think the best way to kind of is by, initial first steps are done again responsibly and well, with public and private partners, and that what is essentially kind of a private sector efforts, but international private sector efforts, can demonstrate one, that this can be done, that it can be done responsibly, that it is probably is our best bet, and so we really should be doing it and should be supporting it both at the policy level and at the institutional level. First, we have to have a good reputation and do it wisely and do it well. And then once we can demonstrate that, then I think then policy will kind of follow upon. But to some extent, where we are right now is getting the notion that getting marine CDR, like most people haven't even heard of it, right? So even within, I've been to ocean sustainability conferences where I was the one introducing the idea that this was going to happen, right? And so for the most part, within kind of the policy shops, even within government, people are waking up to it, really haven't even heard about it, don't develop an expertise. So it's kind of, so we're at the point now, like introduce the notion that this exists and that it's possible and that it can be done responsibly and well, and that it's really important to building a sustainable future is that these pathways are supported. Like that is the level of policy analysis that we are at now, policy advocacy. And then I think that over the next 2 years, we are writing these protocols as we are developing it. Then we're producing examples to say, hey, look, you can just use this. This is an example of a responsible protocol for doing it and allowing others to do it. And then make the policymaker's job easier, at least from a regulatory standpoint, and then getting policy in terms of supporting and putting money and purchasing credits and things like that also follows the same pathway.
Oceanographic model development is a key part of your work.
Yeah.
How are these models used to assess the effectiveness and potential impact of mCDR projects?
A lot of what we're doing, again, always carbon accounting and then ecosystem impacts, right? And we're looking to work at a very large scale, right? You're always talking about tons of carbon, tons of biomass, tons, but it will really lead to kilotons, megatons, gigatons, really is what we're thinking about, right? And the ocean, the marine environment is enormously complex and very, very hard to work with. And it's messy and there's just kind of huge signal to noise ratios. And one of our mantras is that, especially if you're doing something like ocean alkalinity enhancement, where you're introducing pH change within the marine environment to draw down. One of our sayings is that a good project is an invisible project. And so, a kilometer downstream, even kind of 100 meters downstream, you really should be able to detect that it's even there. So that's a really important principles to be embedding in our work. But also, in terms of you're asking about how do you measure it, well, you can. That's kind of part of the point. If you can see the impact of your own project, then you're probably doing it wrong. Certainly closer to the pipe or closer within the project, you can see measurable scopes. But the measuring a carbon flux within a project area, trying to scale is essentially an impossible task. That is not how you are evaluating your carbon removal. You're going to weigh the biomass. You're going to just do the chemistry based on how much alkalinity you introduced. Those are kind of how you do it. And so lots of the systems that you're relying on for the questions that you're trying to answer, you need models. And the first step is like, well, what questions are we trying to answer? What is the problems we're going to solve for, right? And so some of the questions would be like, hey, this method, you grew in a bunch of biomass, you've pulled carbon out of the water, but we don't care about pulling carbon out of the water. We care about getting it out of the air. And so in Henry's law, there's principles that roughly a 1-to-1 basis. If that water stays near the surface, then an equivalent amount will be drawn from the air. But there's, of course, no guarantee that that water will stay near the surface. And so it could get sucked down and then stay down, but then bubble up months later. And so you really need physical oceanographic models to say, all right, where will this water go? And where will this water go over the next month, 6 months, over the next year, over the next 10 years, right? And so that can only be accomplished through modeling. And then similarly, some of the other questions we're looking at are you put a bunch of biomass here at the bottom of the ocean. How long is it going to be there? Right? What and what other ecosystem impacts? But even just kind of answering the question of how quickly will that biomass dissolve? Where will it go once it dissolves? How long will, under what timeline? Because someday it's all moving around, it all goes up and down. At some point, it will. We know that carbon will reach the atmosphere, but under what kind of timeline? And so, again, without modeling systems to evaluate that, you couldn't really answer those questions. But with modeling systems, we can feel confident. And I'm not an oceanographer. I work with oceanographers. But we can begin to answer some of these fundamental questions around. And there's a state of the art, right? And there are limitations around different levels of scope. It could be a global model. It could be a regional model. It could be a local ecosystem model. And so the ability to navigate, to kind of operate at the proper scope and to find a model or to invent a model or apply the correct model That's answering the question that you have is really kind of challenging and important. And then kind of recognizing the limitations, the uncertainty around what it is your claims that you're making with those models is really important as well. Continuing to refine them and see that they are refined and that you're incorporating the latest models as this industry advances and evolves.
So we do want to reduce carbon in the water too, right? We want to reduce the acidity because
We do, but the
one,
acidity and carbon aren't quite related. And so one of the co-benefits of introducing alkalinity is reducing acid acidification. However, the ocean's really large. And so as much as we would like to claim that, we're reducing, it is incredibly important that the ocean does not increasing get more acidic, right? But that, as I mentioned, a responsible project is an invisible one. And so that also cuts against your claims that you really are making one, even if we're doing CDR projects at a very large scale, let's say we really were doing at ocean alkalinity enhancement at like a gigaton a year, 10 gigatons every year, still the ocean is just much, much bigger than that. And so you probably wouldn't see even a regional coastal, you might not really see major changes in alkalinity again, especially if you're operating kind of responsibly. So it's absolutely the case that the ocean is getting dangerous. It's getting hotter. It is very, that it is undergoing both physical and chemical and biological changes that are deeply concerning, and our ability to really impact those, other than stopping what's making it worse, which is the carbon concentration of the air, is like deeply limited.
how do you address the uncertainties and limitations of oceanographic modeling?
Mainly, you address them, you acknowledge them, right? And so in everything that we're doing, we producing standards, publishing those standards, we're valuing the standards. We often don't dictate exactly which modeling system is required, but require them. This is a question that you must answer with your model, and you must justify why this is the appropriate model, right? And the project, it's on the project developer to acknowledge and subject to review and audit their own levels of uncertainty or the limitations of the modeling systems that they're using. And so we use the best that's available to us. We acknowledge its limitations. We are collectively seeking to improve it. And that requires investment and research, and just to incorporate those findings as we proceed. Acknowledge what you got, use the best tools available to you, and keep moving forward.
As a systems expert,
Mm.
how do you approach the complex challenges of climate change and carbon removal?
I think the one is to understand what piece you're working on and what problems you're trying to solve, right? And so the climate crisis is enormously multifaceted, right? And even the climate crisis in the ocean is enormously multifaceted. How bad is it going to get? What other changes happen to the ocean? How quickly are things changing? How can we protect these ecosystems? And these are all challenging, worthy projects that should absolutely have research dedicated to them. But in our case, we really do focus on methodology development, specifications development, so that we can making sure we're both being clear about what questions we are answering, questions we're not answering, and then making sure we're using the right tools for the job. Right? And so to me, it all really starts with those methodology developments, these underpinnings of what you're doing.
How do you integrate diverse scientific disciplines and engineering expertise into your climate solution work?
I am not an oceanographer. I spent my career working in a variety of tech startups, but nothing within science or environmentalism or any of these things before I had my own climate wake up call. And so I come to this as somebody who's not a scientist, who's not an oceanographer, and I really thought that my own technical and software development expertise would be an important component. And to some extent it has. And to some extent, it is not. A lot of what's happening in marine CDR is it's kind of a data desert right now. We don't have a lot of sensors in the water. We don't have a lot of projects in the water. We are still building the pathways to move forward. And so my role has been kind of a little different from what I expected it would be. But I do think that I have had to learn and to develop myself the ability to synthesize the scientific and the project developer and the systems analyst and even the commercial perspectives, right? And so I'm on a lot of calls where I'm the only one who doesn't have a PhD on the call. And so to some extent, you still have to kind of dig in and read the papers. And even if you're not a researcher and no one's looking to you to develop the research, you can still interpret it, interrogate it, and making sure that you're understanding it and that understanding it is reflected in the standard. And to some extent, a lot of what we're doing, right, is we're taking these scientific principles, these scientific underpinnings, these facts of physics and biology, and we're coming up with means of evaluating them and proving that they work or demonstrating that they work, and then collecting those and then making that available and understandable and explicable and credible to a non-scientific audience, to a commercial audience. And so my own perspective as a non-scientist plays a valuable role in that process, right? Just to be the person who can ask all the dumb questions and ask all the questions and saying, hey, I know if I had a PhD, I would be embarrassed to admit that I don't know this, but I don't. So I'm just going to ask you. And so a lot of what I'll do with my own team and with other folks is saying, hey, here's an interesting thing that I need to understand, and developing my own understanding as well as other people's ability to kind of explain it is a really important part of what I do. And then being able to take that and communicate it and apply it appropriately and then communicate it elsewhere.
So do you use any satellites spectroscopy? We can figure out millions of light years away in planet
Yeah.
what's going on.
For the part, satellite imagery and other things like that, I think are of limited use so far. That really a lot of a responsible project is an invisible one, and especially from space. And so, yes, you certainly can say, certainly at a certain scale, I can see it becoming increasingly relevant, right? But certainly the scales we're at, which are pilot projects, tiny little things. There's nothing to see. But even at greater scales, with some of the biotic pathways, there's less to see. With some of the biological pathways, there'd be more to see. But still, I think you're probably not kind of quantifying your drawdown or even the total weight of your biomass.
Right. More useful for assessment of the situation rather than.
Right. You could be like, is this patch healthy? Is it as thick as you say it is? That kind of thing. I can see us getting there, but right now we're just not there. And so it isn't really a major factor in what we're doing.
You provide climate startups advice. What are the key factors that make a climate startup successful in today's market?
I am kind of a tech startup guy. That's kind of my background I came from. And so I've done some kind of advisory work even before starting my own venture. Although I hadn't done the full founder's journey. I'd been early hire and seen other people done it. But I really enjoy that. I've always enjoyed talking to other entrepreneurs and saying, all right, what are you doing? What are you planning? What's your vision? What's your dream? How are you trying to build this? Right. It's just something I always enjoyed. It's a pleasant thing. And so within the climate space, it's especially enjoyable, right? Because there's this really feeling of we really are all in this together. And especially my organization is really based on building these foundations. And so it was kind of designed to give me the opportunity to work with as many different groups as possible, right? We wanted to kind of reach out to other project developers and say, hey, what are you doing? How can we help you, right? Other people who are grappling with these questions, working in the space and saying, how can we make your organization a success? Is really the foundation of why we started this and why we're doing it. Now, that said, my organization has gone through several different business models and several different strategies, and none of them very successful. This is an extremely difficult climate book. Here I'm talking financial climate to operate. I think the fundamental challenge of the climate crisis is who's going to pay for it all, right? And especially who's going to put those bets on the infrastructure plays like we're doing. I talked to VCs and they were like, well, I don't know if anybody's going to make money doing this. I definitely don't know if you're going to make money doing this. And here you've got this little company that is just getting started in this nascent field. And even if they think it's important, is it investable? And I think in a lot of cases, the answer is no. The climate thesis and the venture thesis, I think, are not well aligned at all. The things that are going to make lots of money and the things that we need to do to save the world, there's some overlap, but also there's some not overlap. And
You really have to have a functional carbon offset market.
right. So that's part of it. And if there was a massive demand side, and if demand was way bigger than supply, then some of these problems would solve themselves. Right. Then if there were lots of organizations saying, we've made this net zero commitment, we're going to honor that commitment. I need 100,000 tons this year. How am I going to get them? Right. If that was happening, then a lot of these problems would go away. People would be willing to invest. People would be like, all right, this looks like a scalable solution. We know there's a lot of work to prepare it, understand it, build this foundation, but you can see the demand. And so there would be the investment. But in this case, that's not really the case. It's a voluntary carbon market. People don't want to be embarrassed. People do want inexpensive solutions, and they don't want to be paying for fundamental research and things like that. And these industries need to walk before they can run, and so they need to do pilot projects before they can do scalability projects. And in order to do that, you need investment in teams. And so it's very, very hard like that. And I think the VC thesis doesn't work very well. I think even the grants are limited. There's some opportunities there, but also in our experience, the people that are going to win those grants are the people that are good at winning grants, right? And if I'm competing with Stanford University, with my little team that hasn't really done anything yet, and my little startup, we're not going to win that grant. And we have, and then even philanthropy, the climate crisis is bigger than anybody's budget, anybody's portfolio. And so even there, they have that same problem of who's credible. How do I know that my money's not going to be wasted here? Among all the ways that I could be pointing my funds, how does anybody convince them? How does one get a conversation with them and then also convince them? And the answer is I don't have answers to those questions. In fact, so we shifted at one point to be more of a consulting model. But even then, we were caught up in these same headwinds, right? Because all the partners we would be working with and that we are dependent on to have business for us to help them with are also facing their own funding crisis, facing their own trouble raising money. So, so a lot of what I have to offer to new companies is cautionary tales. Be worried, and I have something more cautionary tales than success stories in terms of how do you make money doing this, how do you build a successful business doing this. But also there are lots of advantages to trying to work on the climate crisis. Right, it is the fundamental challenge of our time. We do need lots of people doing this. It is rewarding. It's very collaborative. Right, there is this kind of spirit of we're all in this together. And so I both want to be part of that collaborative space. I like to reach out to people, talk to everybody, help out wherever I can, but also, recognize that it's tricky. It's hard.
We need more consumer pressure.
We do. A lot of that demand side pressure will come from people insisting that they want carbon neutral brands. They want it, or it could be like in order to get financing for your company, you need to have and make a net zero commitment, or to get insurance, you need to have it, right? So there are levers that need to be pulled, but right now I feel like none of them really are sufficiently being pushed on.
What are the most common pitfalls you've seen climate startups make?
I think in my own case, and probably the case with many others, is this belief that this must be done. This is super important. And so I'm going to go figure it out and then expect to be supported, unfortunately, right? And even with a non-climate startup, there's this kind of model, but in part because you're hoping to make lots of money, and so your investors will make lots of money. And so that's the game. And so I think that there's a big risk in assuming that because this is important, because look at the fate of the world is burning down around us, and no one has anything better to do with their time and their money, assuming that, well, somebody will support this, somebody will get behind us and work with us is probably not necessarily no, right? And so, there are lots and lots of capable, very well-intentioned people building great teams, doing really important work, and some of it's going to work better than others, and that's life, that are going to have trouble getting funding. And then I think there's also a risk, though, a big risk of people playing follow the money and say, well, I had this idea for my business, but I can't get funded doing that, so I'll go do this instead. And maybe you do get funded, but maybe that doesn't really have an impact, right? And so now you're doing really small, feel-good things, but that aren't really going to make a major dent in this climate crisis. And I don't know that I want to be critical of those folks, but it certainly is a risk that within the system. And then you have all the other pitfalls of just trying to start a company, right? Which asks, this is the first time being on this founder's journey myself, of all the things that, you want to start a company, like here are all the things that you have to be really good. You have to put up a website and build a business plan, and recruit great people, and be a great salesperson, and be a pitch. And also you have to innovate around the thing that you're trying to innovate on. And be best in class, and also have a network of other folks that believe in you preset before you even get rolling, because otherwise you're not going to get off the ground. Everything that's going to ask of a founder. And of course, if your focus is like asking people to give you money so that you can do a business and give them more money, it certainly makes sense to have all those gates, or whether it makes sense or not is almost irrelevant. But within the climate space, it's especially frustrating. Like all the things that are being asked of me. And even if you have a lot of faith in your own abilities, realizing that still may not be enough. Really.
Partner and investment evaluation is a core service. What criteria do you use to assess the potential of mCDR technologies projects?
So in our case, we're recognizing a lot of the things that I've just been saying, right? And so it is kind of more important to me that the world is saved than these things, but also recognizing that in order to build a sustainable business, you have to have a revenue model that will allow it to grow, right? These things are both true. What we offer as an organization is really to say, you probably haven't heard of marine CDR, right? You probably have, you're maybe being asked to evaluate this startup as, hey, we want to stimulate phytoplankton growth using this method. And you don't have a criteria. It's new to them. It's new to you. Yeah, you haven't been in this business for 20 years, like other businesses that you might be in, your investment partners, etc. I'm going to expect you don't really know whether this is a terrible idea or a really credible one or a marketable one or what, right? And so a lot of what we can do is I can't really tell you, well, that you're going to make lots of money doing this, but I can absolutely help you evaluate, is this a good idea? Is this important? Is this a really compelling way to remove carbon dioxide efficiently from the atmosphere? And what is the potential? What are the barriers to even finding out if this is going to be efficient and work? And that is certainly in areas where we do have a lot of perspective and a lot of expertise. In terms of offering advice, that is what we offer.
You can't just go to some big fishery tuna company and say you get more phytoplankton, then you get more krill, and then you get more tuna.
There
Or
could be, right? These are there are some industries, somewhat more mature, that at least have some sort of track record, right? But a lot of the things that we are looking at specifically, right, is not just even just marine, it's kind of marine carbon removal. That's really an area where somebody's just doing a fishery. I have limited amounts of useful advice to give them. But if somebody's evaluating a marine removal company, then I certainly have a lot to offer.
how do you balance the need for rapid deployment with the need for rigorous scientific evaluation?
Yeah, that is one of the fundamental challenges within marine CDR. As you design these early standards, right, we do need to design them recognizing everyone's going to start small with these tiny little pilot projects, but that we need to plan for, expect scalability and growth. That's the whole point of the exercise. If this thing is not going to be safe at scale, it's not going to be measurable at scale, it's really not a promising solution at all. And so as you're developing protocols, as you're developing standards, you definitely always have to be looking to the future. But then also the pace at which things are moving is not very fast. We are just writing the rule books now. We're applying for the permits. We're trying to get started. We're just getting, and so the things that are happening are just pilot projects. And
It
so
really
there's
makes
both always looking to the future, but also you do want to be extra rigorous early on to making sure that you're are being honest and robust and you're correctly evaluating these things. You're not setting a roadblock in of yourself. You're not setting an unnecessary, inappropriate roadblock. And so kind of plan for scale, but also recognize the present and get going. And really, for worse, we aren't doing megaton, gigaton scale projects anytime super soon yet. People are kind of looking to do much smaller scales. And so we'll be growing to it over time. And we've got a long ways to go and a lot of work to do to really get to those scales. And so we'll be continually updating the protocols and evaluating things, as things grow.
marine experiments and pilot project designs are crucial for advancing mCDR. What are some of the most promising mCDR technologies currently being explored in pilot projects?
So really everyone is operating at the pilot stage now, right? And so there within the marine space, there are somewhat well established things to turn kelp into biochar is pretty straightforward. Doing large scale sink to sequester kelp operations is still beginning to understand. We've been working on standards for taking terrestrial biomass, so it could be agricultural waste or tree products, and then deploying them in a marine anoxic environment specifically. And that's kind of a great kind of starting point for marine CDR, in part because these anoxic environments, there are old shipwrecks down there that haven't decomposed for centuries, and there's not much lives down there because there's no oxygen and things don't decompose. And so there's reasons to believe and to demonstrate that you can put biomass there and it's going to be safe. It's not going to go anywhere, and it's not going to really disrupt it seriously, and depending on the scales. And so, though there are kind of multitudes, and then there's areas of ocean fertilization. Can we stimulate microalgae growth either potentially through upwelling or fertilization, and then different fertilization strategies? And so there are lots of different pathways, lots of ways to think about these, cultivated different flavors of it. And we are interested in cultivating, any and all of them. And though that's just within the biological pathways, right? Within the abiotic pathways, there's direct ocean capture, where you move the water through a processing plant, like a wastewater treatment facility, and pull the carbon out, and then kind of release this decarbonized water in the atmosphere into the ocean. There are things like deploying olivine in coastal areas or other alkaline minerals into coastal areas and using natural erosion to release the alkalinity. There are things like ocean alkalinity enhancement, also using wastewater treatment facilities, where now you're introducing a source of alkalinity into the water and then kind of releasing that into the. And so there are lots that we're still very much at the beginning of all this. People getting started, getting the first set of permits in, the first pilot projects going, the first verification protocols in place. That's all. Lots of different little interesting things happening to move this forward.
So do you still need permits to operate in deep sea or in international?
Absolutely, more so. And I think there's something like London Protocol anti-dumping, and so it is exactly whose permission you need to get is still an area of, depending where you're operating. Most people are really operating, even if you're offshore, you're still probably in somebody's coastal territory waters, just because it's too expensive. It takes too much time to kind of operate way out in the middle of nowhere. And so really even most every project developer these days needs a permit, is operating within.
And
So
you're getting that from Bureau of Land Management or the
it's
Army
mostly
Corps of
EPA in the United
Engineers?
States.
Oh, but if you're really close to the coast, it's the Army Corps of Engineers.
Right. There certainly are coastal projects where they would be involved, right?
How do you ensure that these pilot projects are conducted responsibly and minimize potential environmental impacts?
And that's very much our job, right? And so the oceanography, if you're an oceanographer, you didn't become an oceanographer. You didn't get a PhD in oceanography because you don't care about the ocean. You do. It is kind of universally the case that within the oceanographic community, there's enormous passion, there's enormous sense of responsibility, regardless, towards the ocean. And so, in fact, there's quite a bit of wariness about large scale commercial interventions in the ocean. If you ask a bunch of oceanographers, hey, what do you think about growing kelp patch the size of a small country, introducing millions of tons of alkalinity into coastal areas? Do you think this is a good idea? Their inclinations to say, well, no, that's a terrible idea, or that's certainly something very deeply concerning. Including, and not just oceanographers, if you just ask any coastal community, hey, what do you think about these potential interventions? Something new, something different within your community, within your area, within your region. Even as people recognize the magnitude of the climate crisis and the need for scalable solutions, and there's still a lot of hesitation. Right? Any community you choose to operate on, and then any community, and then within the oceanographic community more broadly. We really do have to, make sure that we're being responsible and rigorous. And because anybody you're working with, has their own team of oceanographers, that's not a tough sell, right? In fact, and in these first drafts of the protocols that are being written, to some extent, the project developers want them to be rigorous, strenuous. They want to be able to show that they are, in fact, operating responsibly, that this can work and can be done safely and without harmful impacts. And also, it's really important that the first draft be extra rigorous, so that if 5 years down the road we're like, actually, we're pretty sure this is safe, we can now loosen some of these requirements and feel like we can do so appropriately. That's fine. That's good, right? But if you have to do the opposite, if you start off to not quite strict enough, with some assessments that you're not confident in, that the people have questions, and you say, oh, you're right, you need to be much stricter now. That's harder, right? And no one really wants to discount the credits that they've already sold or have that subject to scrutiny. So there's a lot of reason, both within the projects, within the investment community, within this oceanographic, to make sure that this is really being done well and being done responsibly. And to some extent, some of the challenges are to make sure that we're not putting too much roadblocks in front of ourselves, that we are giving ourselves a chance to succeed and proceed.
Do you ever worry about any unintended consequences of massive bioengineering?
I don't really. I know, because we're on the teams, we're in the rooms while these protocols are being developed. We are very concerned about ecological risks. And so we're very concerned that we are not the ones introducing them or allowing other people to introduce them. But then also, we are keenly aware of the cost of failure, right? Of the risks that the entire world, very much including the ocean, each and every ecosystem and each and every species that lives there is facing in the face of this climate crisis, right? And so we're both being very cautious in terms of the risk, but also recognizing that the cost of failure, the cost of we don't proceed, the cost of inaction is enormous. And so we kind of have to keep both of those things in mind. So I'm much more worried about what we won't do than what we will do.
What are the biggest challenges to scaling up mCDR and other carbon removal technologies?
Yeah. I think largely right now we're in this R&D phase. So we're facing these scientific challenges, we're facing these technology development challenges, these methodological challenges. I don't think that's essentially the hard part, right? I actually think that we can do that well. We can demonstrate that it can be done well. And I think we can, and hopefully we will soon. So I really think the biggest challenges are logistical, right? Just the scale that these operations need to run, and capital allocation and getting investment, right? I really do think that if there was the resources to do it today, well, I think it can be done. I think that's the most important thing. If here's $1 trillion in climate change, there's a pathway that we can go down and really do it, right? And it is probably involves marine biology, right? But there's lots of work to be done, but still, it can be done. We have the resources, every reason to push ahead. And the challenge is going to be marshaling at a societal, at an economic level, even just getting started, right? It's an enormous challenge. And then getting the world to operate at the scale that matches the magnitude of this crisis is going to be an enormous challenge.
What are your predictions for the future of carbon removal and climate solutions in the next decade?
Getting into this about 3 years ago, I really came in very optimistically. All right, we'll work on something important and you'll get the support and you'll be able to proceed. And don't really have faith in that right now. I really do think that the models to advance these things don't appear to be doing what needs to get done. Right. And so there are some things that are going well. The biochar projects is proceeding very well. You can see lots of investment in that and other things like that. So there are some bright spots. But then within the broader marine CDR, I think I see a much more trouble spots. I see a lot of great companies doing really important work that are having trouble staying afloat. And so that is deeply worrisome. And then also, of course, the administration changes that are going in the United States does not make that picture any prettier. It was already pretty dire, right? And it's worse. So there we're in a really serious risk of some of the work will still proceed. We think of kind of what we're doing is kind of the world, the option to save itself if and when it decides it's serious, going to get serious about this, right? If we can kind of the next 5-10 years, get the protocols in place, get the rule books in place, the baseline saying, hey, when you want to do this, we've kind of it out for you. And this is an option available to you. So I hope we can do that. I'd love to see that, yes, all these organizations are making these net zero commitments. They're going to be honoring those commitments. Demand is going to grow. And people are going to recognize that marine solutions are really promising, are worthy of investment, can be done responsibly. Wish I could predict that that's all going to happen in short order, and I can't in good faith make that claim. And so the option is available to us. I don't know that we're going to choose it.
Yeah. Thanks.
Could change. We can hope, yes. There are lots of people who do recognize the magnitude of this, who are dedicating their time, are dedicating their resources. I work on climate. This is kind of ask an expert office hours program, right? And so people who I don't know can set up appointments to talk to me all the time. And there are many passionate people who are like, I'm good at what I do. I'm a great software engineer. I'm great at marketing. I'm an entrepreneur with a solid track record. I recognize how important this is. I want to get involved. I want to apply my time. I want to apply my talents to this crisis. And it's hard. They're having a hard time finding an entry point. They're having a hard time kind of getting in. They're having a hard time, making it go. But the passion is there. People recognize the talent is there around the world. So good people want to work on solutions, and we need them to be doing so. It's definitely are some moments of hope, but also lots of reasons for concern.
What role will international collaboration and policy play in shaping this future?
I think it's essential, right? It's a global crisis, and the solutions are global. And in our organization has been one of my key insights during the pandemic. Was I spent my life saying, all right, well, who's the most kind of interesting company in Portsmouth, New Hampshire to work for? And then as I was pivoting into climate, as the pandemic happening, I was like, oh, wait a minute, we can work with anybody on Earth now, right? So we're not constrained by geography. And so as we kind of developing this organization and trying to cultivate partnerships, it's been great working with standards developers out of Finland and project developers in Turkey and Dubai and the Philippines and Zimbabwe. It's exciting, and it's totally cool. There is this kind of scientific nexus in Europe and the United States, this kind of VC nexus, which is like kind of Silicon Valley and the United States. And there's kind of a philanthropic nexus, which in terms of what I can access is when to the extent I can access this any at all. Seems to be kind of the problems, the solutions, the project developers, the methodology developers, the standards that are being developed, the policies that are being developed, are in nature. And to some extent, the solutions work best in a global environment. Like enhanced rock weathering is a great way to deacidify soil. It's a terrestrial solution. It's not necessarily a marine one, but you can take an alkaline material, you can use it as a soil supplement. You can deacidify your soil and really enrich the soil and grow crops with it. It's a great CDR solution, but it does work best when the soil is really poor, right? And so there is really kind of a get out of the United States, even get out of here. We're working with a partner in Turkey and like, well, this is a great solution, but actually your soil is too good. And so this will be more effective, in other areas. And similar stories with things like biochar. There's kind of relatively low entry. There's a real need in many areas to like have a robust supplement. And so, there are economic advantages, societal advantages to get out of the US, get out of Europe, and develop communities elsewhere. So yes, absolutely, both the
Yeah,
needs are global, the policies are global, the people are global, and so it's absolutely international.
there's a lot happening
There
in
is a lot.
Australia and New Zealand and all over the.
Exactly, absolutely.
For aspiring professionals
Mhm.
interested in climate solutions and carbon removal, what advice would you give them?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, you kind of part of this program where people kind of check in with how can I or how can I? And so the first piece of advice is one, do like enthusiasm. We need you. We need all of these talented people. We need people. This is a fundamental challenge. We need everybody kind of apply their time, apply their talents to this effort. Also, but I warn you, it's hard. Like it's enormously frustrating to find a way to contribute, find a way to get in. This is a time where we are just at the beginning of this road. We're just starting to figure this out, right? 3 years ago, I was not a climate professional. I was working for a telemedicine company. I was working for an insurance group. Like now I'm kind of an expert but that's like not a long time. And so there's a real opportunity to kind of plant a flag, an area that interests you. The climate crisis is extremely multifaceted. It doesn't matter kind of what community what part of the ecosystem you're interested in, whether you're interested in mitigation or the oceans or adaptation or clean energy. Like this, no matter where you are and what you're passionate about, we need you. Right. And so
It's not going away.
you absolutely can. And we need everyone to that. And so, and they do that, kind of plant a name for yourself. And so hopefully you'll kind of find opportunities and opportunities grow. And as the demand, you'll kind of be there and try to volunteer. You're kind of supporting your climate policies and advocating for them. This is important. Kind of coming on fast. Things are going to get bad quickly. But this is it. Like if we are not serious with this, if we're not working on solutions now, things are just worse from here. And people do it. Get in, chase it, and be frustrated.
Be prepared for
Be prepared.
How can they get involved with Oceanid to contribute
Yeah.
to the field?
I think due to we are very small. We are not very successful. Our future is uncertain. So, I meet some that I'm like, I would love to work with you. I would love to, love to even people who are offering to work with us. And I don't really even have those opportunities for the most part. So, I do think, that we've been doing is enormously important and that we do not really have the means to continue and the opportunity to do so. And so other people are interested in what we do or what I do. Happy to talk about it. Happy to talk about ways to make this stuff happen.
Ben, this has been an incredibly insightful and important conversation. Thank you for sharing your expertise and the work of Oceanid with us.
Thank you. I really appreciate this. And I hope your audience enjoys it. And I really enjoyed speaking with you as well.
And to our viewers, thank you for joining us on Clean Titans. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us for more insights into the world of climate solutions and sustainable innovation. Until next time, stay engaged and keep working towards a better future for all of us.